chose Rebekah Carson for my leader. He's right up here. Rebekah chose Dennis Prescott, who's right there in the middle, and Matt chose Vince Lombardi, who's over on the far side. So we're going to talk a little bit about quick background on our leaders, and then we'll go into their view of leadership. So Rachel Carson was a marine biologist and ecologist, and also a writer. She grew up exploring the coast of Maine, which kind of developed her love for nature, but she's most famously known for her book that she published called Silent Spring. And it basically exposed how harmful pesticide use is on animals and human health and the environment. And it sort of launched the entire modern environmental movement. And so this is just a quick photo that shows the DDT, which is one example of a pesticide that was used in the mid-1900s in the United States. And so she sort of exposed how harmful this pesticide use was. So I looked at her leadership through a few different lenses. The first is the trait approach. So she was intelligent, moral, passionate, courageous, and determined, especially during difficult times. So while she was writing this book, Silent Spring, she developed breast cancer, and she also was, her niece died, and she was in charge of caring for her niece's son, and also her mother, who was ill. So she had a lot of personal challenges while she was writing this book that ended up being very influential, and she persevered through those challenges. She did a lot of background research while writing this book, so had a lot of expert knowledge on the subject area. She talked to physicians and scientists and government officials so that her book was credible and portrayed accurate information. So she was a real expert in the subject area. She was also a transformational leader. So she had strong moral conviction and she had strong values. And this book ended up really being a call to action for people. She was visionary, so she envisioned a time when humans and nature kind of got along together in harmony rather than humans sort of taking advantage of nature. And that's what she wrote about in this book. She was also an effective communicator. So this book she wrote was really persuasive and it was compelling, but it also had a lot of background, a scientific background, so that it was accurate. And she also she spoke in front of Congress about her findings, about her research and the connection between pesticides and cancer in humans. And she also spoke on the news on a CBS show to portray her findings. Ultimately, she got the attention of the president, John F. Kennedy, and he created a committee to look into the use of pesticides or the impact of pesticides on the environment and on human health. And she died shortly after the book was published, but ultimately her knowledge and her legacy led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act in the United States. So that was the lasting change she created. She was able to motivate concerned citizens to speak up for the environment.
So the leader I chose is Dennis Prescott. And Dennis Prescott is a famous chef who 6 years ago had no idea how to cook. He rose to fame by teaching himself how to cook from cookbooks. So I'm going to start passing around the book that he wrote so you can go look at it while I talk. But Dennis started out as a musician. He spent 10 years traveling around the United States and Canada trying to break through into the music world and ended up settling in Nashville. And he realized that music doesn't always pay the bills. And all he really could make and eat was macaroni and cheese. And he didn't really have a desire to learn more until after some time you really start to get tired of macaroni and cheese. So his friend challenged him to go take out a library card and take out cookbooks from the library. And he did that. He took out 3 cookbooks and actually taught himself how to cook from them, cooking every single recipe in the book. And then he fell in love with cooking. He moved back to Canada, where he was originally from, and started posting photos on social media of the things that he was making. And you have some examples here. They're all throughout his cookbook. They look incredible. But he started to get attention for it, and now has almost 500,000 followers on Instagram, all looking at his food, how he cooks, and what he does. And he doesn't have a restaurant, so he doesn't have any legitimate power. All his power is referent, because these people are seeing him and liking what he's doing and want to follow him. But that's not the only thing that Dennis Prescott does. He is a famous chef. He cooks on TV and continues to come up with new recipes. But he decided to use his fame and his leadership abilities for a greater cause. So he became a World Vision Ambassador, which helps children in impoverished countries, as well as communities, be able to rebuild and to grow and be able to sustain themselves. So they'll go into a country or a village, and they'll teach them skills that they can use so that they can leave and that community can just blossom on their own and grow. And that's something that he's become an advocate for and he keeps speaking about. So he uses his presence and his leadership and all of his followers and directs them to a greater cause. So not just looking at incredible food, but also looking at feeding communities. So we're going to move into his leadership. So I chose authentic leadership for Dennis. He also has a bunch of aspects of transformational leadership. But really for authentic, he has that critical life event that we read about in the book, where he moved from being a starving musician to becoming this famous cook just by taking cookbooks out of the library. And then being able to realize that being able to eat when you don't have a lot of money can be really important. And using that to invest into these children and into these communities and being able to provide for them. He also has a concrete purpose and values, developing those relationships with the people that he's interacting with. He'll go into communities and learn how to cook and bring all those skills that he learns from all over the world back to Canada to be able to put them into his recipes and teach other people about cultures and about all the exciting things that not a lot of people realize. He also has self-discipline and heart. There is a real connection to the work that he's doing. He is passionate about it and he loves it and he gets excited about it. You can see it all over him when he's talking. And I also mentioned before about his referent power. Because he doesn't have a restaurant, he doesn't have a business, every single aspect of his power relates back to social media, and people can click follow or unfollow really, really easily. So this is very much based on how he carries himself, what he says, how he acts, the quality of the beautiful pictures he posts. A lot of that power comes down to what he's doing in that personal power, rather than having that legitimate power of an organization. And his personality is really what carries him through. He's able to make people laugh and make them feel connected, even if people are worlds apart, and really bring them together for a greater cause and being to help out all around the world. That is Dennis Prescott.
All right, and I chose Vince Lombardi, who was the Green Bay Packers head coach and GM from 1961 to 1969. He was born in Brooklyn in 1913. He was the son of two Italian immigrants. So he was raised a devout Catholic, and his whole childhood was kind of based around the idea that he would become a priest one day, and his followers would be his parish. And that really was the foundation of his moral and ethical background. So after a while, he continued to play baseball, and he decided to go a separate route. Obviously didn't become a priest, but decided he wanted to be a coach. And so he started coaching in high school. That led to a coaching job at West Point, which is kind of widely considered the best leadership school in America, so he gathered a lot of knowledge there. Found an assistant job in the NFL with the New York Giants, and then transitioned to the head coaching job with the Green Bay Packers. So when he got to the Green Bay Packers, they were a losing program. They hadn't won in a long time, and they were also kind of a stagnant culture. He got there, and like I said before, had that moral and ethical background that he wanted to instill in that organization. So when he got there were only 2 African American players on the team. The color barrier had just gotten broken in the NFL, but by the time he left, over 25% of the team was African American. So he really created a culture of inclusion. He also had a zero tolerance policy on any sort of derogatory comments. So any sort of racist or homophobic language would get you booted from the team, just like that. So he wanted to make sure that everyone felt that they were welcome and that they were part of that team. So his success on the field was, that they won 5 championships in his 9 years there. So he totally changed the culture in that way and created winners out of a team that was historically losers. So these are the 2 quotes that I think lead into his kind of leadership approach I thought were key. The first one says, the difference between a successful person and others is not a lack of strength, not a lack of knowledge, but rather a lack of will. And leaders are made, they are not born. They're made by hard effort, which is the price we all must pay to achieve any goal that is worthwhile. So he believed in himself as becoming a leader, but he also believed all those things for his followers. So in that way, he believed he could always get better, and his players could as well. So Lombardi's leadership, he was obviously a transformational leader, just in the way that he transformed a losing team into a winning team. He showed his vision, and he shared his vision. So he communicated what he wanted to do, which was obviously win games. He made sure that he was constantly communicating, and is one of those people who was quoted kind of nonstop in the sports world. So you'll always see Vince Lombardi quoted for leadership tendencies, for teamwork, anything that you can think of in terms of a leadership trait. His inspirational trust. So another transformational leader tendency is that they can inspire and that they can inspire trust. He did so by kind of reflecting and living up to what he said. So that 0 tolerance policy, if somebody did break it, he would kick them off the team. That was, he always backed up what he said. And then he empowered players. So I was talking before, actually, he wasn't thought to be necessarily the greatest strategist, but he was one of the greatest motivators, okay? So he allowed his players to play, and he allowed himself to motivate them. Legitimate power, so obviously he had that personal and that position power. He could use that coercive, he could kick somebody off the team or not play them if he didn't think that they were doing the right things, but he really preferred to lead through his own personality. So he preferred to have his followers follow him because they liked him rather than because they feared him. And in that way, I think that he was obviously a charismatic leader. I have another quote here that I think just is reflective of who he was. So he said, it is essential to understand that battles are primarily won in the hearts of men. Men respond to leadership in a most remarkable way. Once you have won his heart, he will follow you anywhere. So in that idea, he understood that he needs to kind of get his players over on his side rather than just tell them what to do. And so he kind of led through being, a personal role model than he was, a feared figure. And then in just that same vein, charismatic leadership ties followers and their self-concept to the organizational identity, and that was obviously to win as a team rather than as an individual. And then just a quick comparison. So we all talked about how our leaders were transformational leaders in that way that they changed pretty much the game in whatever industry that they were in. The first 2, Rachel and Dennis, used writing as their method of communication. So Rachel wrote the book Silent Spring, which was she used her power of persuasion, her skills in writing to persuade that way. And then Dennis Prescott has over 500,000 social media followers. So he leads or communicates obviously just from a social media basis on Instagram and different platforms. I said Lombardi used his poetic articulation, so he could get by. He was clear in his expectations, but also kind of poetic in what he was saying, and made sure that his players were inspired when he said it.
And each of our leaders all use different types of power. So you have Rachel Carson, and she's the expert in her industry. She has studied this, she has worked in this, and she has talked to other researchers in this field. So her power is really based on that expert power. For Dennis Prescott, he's more on that referent power. It's that personal power, that connection with followers that look up to him, that like what he's doing, or are impressed by him. And for Vince Lombardi, he has legitimate power. He is a coach. But he also uses aspects of both expert power and personal power. He kind of combines them all together to use in different ways, in different situations, and how he's leading.
And lastly, we found that they all had their own personal meaning, which they used to kind of inspire others and create the change that they made. So for Rachel, that was caring for humanity and for the environment. That was what she valued, and that's what she's focused on and was able to work toward throughout her life. For Dennis Prescott, it was poverty relief, or it is poverty relief. He is going into developing countries and bringing cooking skills and skills and other types of skills to people who need them. And lastly, for Vince Lombardi, it's team success. So he was focused on the team, not the individual, and that enabled his teams to be so successful. So thank you.